digitaljamsessions.com. Hello and welcome to this Digital Jam session. Today we're joined once again by Maxim Jager, who joins us live from Los Angeles, and we have with us Alan Sott returning to us from New York. Greetings, gentlemen.
Hello there.
Hello.
Hello. So, for the benefit of our lovely listeners, would you like to explain a little bit more about what you do and what you're up to? Maxim, let's start with you in terms of your role as a futurist and filmmaker and what you're up to in Los Angeles.
Wow. Well, actually, I'm in Las Vegas today. I'm going to be speaking at a conference run by Adobe this week, Adobe Max. I'll be showing some future of media technology stuff, some new VR and AR and all of that. But most of the time I'm in Los Angeles having meetings about film development projects, or I'm back and forth between Los Angeles and London consulting on new technologies. And the unfortunate thing about those technologies is that I'm very rarely allowed to talk about them. So I end up having to refer to several of them as Fight Club, which isn't very helpful when you're trying to tell people what you do for a living.
Okay, would you like to give some context as to the Adobe piece? Because there may be some folks who are listening who don't realise that you actually did indeed write the book when it came to Adobe.
Oh, well, not all of the books. I write the official book on, I write the official book on Premiere Pro, and I've recorded a lot of tutorials. I actually worked out recently, I've had 3 million views of my tutorials now, which is pretty cool.
Goodness gracious.
But basically, I produce training materials for people learning to edit film and TV on several systems: Avid Media Composer, Premiere Pro, Edius. Teach a bunch of stuff. But more and more when I'm speaking at conferences and film festivals now, I'm speaking less and less about the buttons that go woo, and more about the human condition, storytelling and narrative and learning, pedagogy and education in general, and all of that stuff, which I find is really fascinating, because it doesn't matter what technology you're using. The human condition hasn't changed very much for a very long time. We're just looking at different manifestations of what it means to be human. And I find that fascinating.
Wonderful. Thank you, Maxim. Alan, why don't you tell us a little bit more about what you're up to in New York as a marketing expert?
I'm an all things digital marketer. I say all things digital because it is literally all things digital, and to go through the list would take us forever. More recently, I have a lot of experience in healthcare, which is one of the reasons I'm here on this episode. Through Data Monitor, one of our verticals at Data Monitor was in healthcare, and the past 3 years I've been working for a software as a service company whose product was an electronic health record. So I have a lot of knowledge in healthcare and technology. More recently, I've been working also in 360 and VR a little bit, dabbling and trying to see where a marketing view is needed in that realm. Mm-hmm. Also, Maxim, I would like to say, Maxim, I've probably viewed many of your tutorials on Premiere. So,
thank you. The weird thing for me is that I speak at these conferences and nobody ever sees my face; they just hear my voice, and I get these strange looks from people because they recognize my voice and they associate it with the pain and discomfort of learning. So they're suspicious of me and they can't remember why they know me. And then if I say, "No, let's click on the file menu," they suddenly remember the tutorials they watched. It's a shame.
Yes, every time something goes wrong, they're not the way I want it to. I'm going to your page.
Exactly.
Most likely.
Yeah, you see, it's a very uncomfortable Pavlovian association. Pavlovian anchor. My voice and being frustrated.
You're just causing trauma and stress where you go. Yeah. You've both alluded to this, but the topic for today is ethics and technology. And there's a reason why we're talking about this today, and primarily it is to do with the lovely people at Dubbit. Now, Dubbit have recently launched the CVR, which is the Children in VR report. And one of the reasons why I find this particularly fascinating is because it addresses and deals with a lot of these moral and ethical standards when it comes to exposing children to immersive technology. Now, the reason that is particularly interesting is because one of the things that they identified was the fact that when it comes to more old-fashioned technologies, that sounds terrible to say more old-fashioned technologies, but things like TV, parents generalistically are not worried about sitting their child in front of a TV and letting their child watch TV for a little while they're not there. In the same way, they're not really that worried about putting a tablet device in their kid's hand and letting them swipe around. And, the average 2-year-old can now swipe a tablet. But when it comes to VR, there is inherently a caution that parents have about allowing their children to put a headset on their head. And there is already a mythology around this idea that actually the technology is harmful, or the technology is opening their child's mind to dangerous or potentially dangerous experiences. And so I felt it was really important to have this conversation and to kind of explore exactly what it is that's driving people to this assumption that there is perhaps inherent danger involved when it comes to allowing people to be immersed within the technology. So I'm going to throw this open to you first of all, Maxim, just because I know that we've had this conversation before, and I'm curious to hear whether or not any of your thoughts on this have changed since the last time we spoke about it.
No, I don't think my thoughts have changed. I mean, I think there's two issues that are really at stake here. One is that people are always afraid of the unknown. If you remember when microwave ovens came into the home, lots of people were saying, I would never allow one in the home because, I heard a rumor that it'll irradiate you and turn you into a glowing spider or something. And then over time, you get this increase in familiarity, and that familiarity breeds a kind of confidence. It's the same kind of thing you get in sales and marketing. We have consumer confidence just through repeat experience and repeat anecdotal evidence. And I think that we're seeing a bit of that with the new VR technology because it's a genuinely new medium. It's a completely different experience interacting with it. But I think perhaps a more interesting line of inquiry is that the truth is that it is more dangerous, I mean, there's an incredible potential for virtual experiences to have a positive impact on people. And I've heard some very interesting studies exploring the use of cognitive behavioral therapy in the VR space and AR space, augmented reality space, or even the mixed reality space. That's all very powerfully positive. But at the same time, it is dangerous. As somebody I know, we went to the IMAX VR experience in Los Angeles, and most of it's okay, it's cool, but one of the experiences, you're holding a physical plastic gun and you're in a virtual space that you can move around physically. It's the John Wick 2 experience, and you're being shot at in this game by lots and lots of people. Now, the person I was with, I didn't know, had a genuine gun phobia. They were really anxious about guns, and it was so immersive. And the feeling of turning your head and seeing that somebody, I mean, it's only animation, it's not photorealistic, but seeing the facsimile of somebody aiming and firing guns at you, she was really affected by it. It took her about 3 days to get over the experience, even though she knew that it was artificial. And this is not the same as viewing things through that portal of a two-dimensional window. Even if it's 3D, stereoscopic, you still have that frame around it. You're still looking through a window. And if you've ever studied this branch of psychology, NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, some of the techniques they employ to take a memory that's traumatizing and diminish its impact over you is that you visualize yourself in the scene, and then you imagine that scene shrinking into a TV set, and then the TV set gets further and further away and smaller and smaller and smaller. And it does seem to have an effect on reducing the emotional impact of the memory. But what we're talking about with VR is the exact opposite. We're taking experiences that until now have been seen through a window, seen on the other side of the glass, and surrounding ourselves with them. And I think that there is some legitimate argument for being cautious about the experiences we subject ourselves to, but there's also a great cause for optimism about the positive effect of it.
So it's interesting that you say this, because you're talking about the positive application of VR being used for cognitive, behavioral therapies and various other things. And even just by the fact that you're saying that, one of the things that people tend to forget is if it's being utilized to treat behavioral issues and it can be used as a therapy, it stands to reason that it also is having a neurological impact. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to use it in the first place in order to adjust somebody's thinking or behaviors in the first place. So it's almost like, just by the fact that you're using it for behavioral therapy means that it has a degree of impact that people probably aren't really thinking about. And I know that we've said this before, and we've said this, quite a lot actually, about this whole piece that people tend to forget is that The reason we call them VR experiences is because people remember these things that they are playing or experiencing as memories, rather as memories of something that has actually happened to them, rather than remembering it as something that they watched. As you rightly say, Maxim, people will watch something on a television screen and they'll remember that they saw it within the frame. They'll remember that they had that frame of a TV and that they could look away. They could look outside of the frame and know that the content would stop. With virtual reality, the memories that they're creating in the first place are something that they are creating as a memory of something that happened directly to them. And this is why I still do not understand the fundamental desire for people to create horror experiences in VR, because they are ultimately traumatizing people and creating traumatic memories. And whilst lots of people think it's very funny and they love seeing the YouTube videos of people screaming and ripping these headsets off their head and what have you, it's all, fun and laughter. But ultimately, if we're not careful, we will see in 4 or 5 years' time an emergence within the psychology and treatment of mental conditions, a new subset of treatment specifically for people who are suffering from post-traumatic stress, having had an experience in VR. And so I'm throwing this out to you, Alan, in terms of the kind of mental health and the healthcare aspect of this. This idea that people perhaps are not thinking before they create the content is quite an interesting conundrum, if you like, because there isn't anybody who's necessarily out there, I'm not going to say policing, but providing guidance, shall we say, on what is right and proper to create versus perhaps the things that are slightly more questionable. And so I'm curious from your perspective whether or not you see this as a potential health risk.
So, I mean, I'm going to start with I think there's a certain level of personal responsibility though in there as well, and maybe in a VR environment or in a 360 environment, I think maybe you don't know what you're getting into. You were just speaking about the 360 horror scenes and whatnot. And there is a segment of the population who actually gets enjoyment out of those. Mm-hmm. Those would be the same people who watch horror movies would probably get huge enjoyment out of those, whereas somebody else may not be able to handle that. So in terms of policing, I mean, how do you tell somebody what to create? Because I think everybody's creating, like you said, I don't think there's any malicious, let's go ahead and create this bad thing that everybody's going to see. I think it's somebody who's targeting a certain market and saying, you know what, let's really scare the pants off this person and this person who enjoys this type of material and give this to them. The problem comes in when somebody we were talking about children before, they stick their phone in their, they're watching a 360 video through their phone and headset, and now this kid is traumatized for life probably. And that's where the problem is. But I do think there has to be a certain level of personal responsibility as well.
So, okay, talking about personal responsibility, and again, I'm going back to the regular rant I have when I'm at conferences where I talk about this whole thing of just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I know, Max, I've said it so many times. But I kind of feel like that there is a lot of this kind of people making things just because they can. And I'm curious, Maxim, from your perspective, obviously right now you're very immersed in Los Angeles and then kind of the creative community in Los Angeles. And I do wonder if perhaps there isn't a little bit of technology first rather than story first when it comes to the reasons why people would create something in VR in the first place. I know that there's a lot of people who are just kind of taking budgets from PR and marketing budgets to create content, rather than going in there and saying, you know what, I have a story to tell, I have a message to share, I have something meaningful to impart, and this is the right medium within which to do it, versus people who are just saying, sure, give me the money, I will throw this thing together and you'll enjoy it, it's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a perennial issue with any kind of new technology, isn't it? I mean, particularly with consumer technology across the board. When Nintendo produced the Wii, a lot of people were surprised because it was relatively poor quality graphics, relatively simple games. But they quite correctly pointed out that all human beings want to play games. They just don't always find gaming technology accessible. And they created a new form, and very, very successfully. I think that with any new technology, there tends to be a degree of experimentation. And I would liken it to being an artist discovering a new medium. Maybe you're used to working in pencils, and now you're exploring working in acrylics, or maybe you're moving into working with oils. And as you change into working with that new medium, you discover that there are new strengths, new weaknesses, new challenges, new opportunities. And to translate that into things like VR and augmented reality and so on, we have a bit of a chicken and egg problem where for most of the money that comes from media is going to come from, and there are exceptions, but it's going to come from advertising or people paying, right? It's going to be from people buying tickets for movies or people still buy Blu-rays and so on. So in order for people to pay, they have to have a thing to pay for. And unlike opening up a coffee shop where you just pour cups of coffee for people, there actually has to be some control over the distribution medium. And in the case of 2D videos, we've got that totally nailed. You can watch media on anything you like. It's the same media. We're already beginning to see some technologies that will let you bridge from, you'll be halfway through a movie on your laptop, you switch to your phone, and suddenly you're already there and you're halfway through it on your phone. The 2D world we've got nailed. It's great. But in terms of the distribution of 360 media or true VR media, we're still nailing down exactly what the specifications are. We're pretty much getting there, but there's some issues with the metadata, and physically you have to have a different type of screen. Now, I've spoken many times about the explosion of HD. It was really driven by the PlayStation 2 being a games console that could play back HD graphics. So there's this kind of need for an ecosystem where you need enough screens to make it worth distributing the content, because you've got a big enough audience to make it monetizable, to make it meaningfully monetizable. And you've got to have the content that will make the people want to pay for those devices to access it. And both of those things have to happen at the same time. And I think what's happening at the moment is it's almost like the content providers are seeding, they're seeding the fields. They're trying to create this demand for content by making content that people want to experience. But nobody really knows what content's going to be the most popular, because we're still learning the rules of storytelling. And we know, for example, that if you put a 360 rig on the helmet of somebody going down a ski slope, that is going to be a pretty compelling and exciting experience. But there's only so many times you can watch skiing videos and be excited by it. So we're now, for example, the BBC are working on a number of technologies that allow the end viewer to choose the construction of the content that they're witnessing. For example, which character do you look at the most? Okay, you're going to follow that person's storyline. Even though you didn't realize you were making a choice, you are making a choice. We're still exploring how knowing what people are looking at can change the experience. So basically, we're still learning the ropes. We're still trying to build the audience. There isn't enough of an audience yet to say, let's spend $100 million on a Hollywood movie, because we're sure that we can distribute it in such a way that, we're going to make back that $100 million net profit. And so people are saying, well, we'll put 100,000 into this, we'll put 50,000 into that. We'll run a competition for some students. We'll see what they come up with. And hopefully over time, the number of headsets, the number of devices people can use will increase, and we'll build the audience. So I just think we're at the audience building stage still.
And I would tend to agree, in as much as I don't think there is anywhere near enough distribution to make it plausible, and which is one of the reasons why I think a lot of the larger AAA game studios have kind of backed away from necessarily making any significant or meaningful content for the medium. But one of the things there that you talk about was this idea of kind of the idea of having data being the driver in terms of the experience. So, for example, you look at a particular character more often, therefore you follow that character, etc., and so forth. And one of the things that I know, Alan, we've spoken about this before, is around kind of the use and application of data when it comes to immersive technology. Now, we talked about this in the context of marketing, but I do think it's kind of relevant here in terms of the piece that Maxim was referring to with the BBC example, which is that there has to be a line somewhere when it comes to the use of somebody's data within immersive tech. So for example, if I am constantly looking at, a particular character's, I don't know, gadget in their hand or jacket that they're wearing or whatever the thing might be, is there a line that we need to draw wherein marketers are not using that to then start flinging lots of advertising at me to say, by the way, do you want this new gadget? And, oh, here's where you buy that jacket. Or is this something that we should be logically looking at as a form of monetization? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Alan.
I think, what you bring up is actually very interesting because with the way data is being collected, we're collecting data on everything. So in a VR environment, I mean, they are like, if you're looking at a jacket or you're looking at something, like that data is going to be collected. And I'm not sure if there's a right answer to this because at the end of the day, like, to tell a marketer to be careful how you use a new marketing channel is probably not the best argument at all. The marketer is going to want to use that channel and collect that data. And somebody, like, as the industry matures, there will be other businesses that pop up that are selling that data, to companies and selling that data to marketers, and using that as a way to get them to advertise more within the VR experience. Do I think it's right? No. Do I think it's going to happen? Yes. But I think it will probably hit a point where, again, there's going to be, and I think we spoke about this before, I think there's going to be a whole new set of laws. I mean, like, I do think there's going to have to be some kind of regulation where it says, you can't do this, because nobody wants to, you're ruining the experience if every time I look at something, now I have an Amazon ad following me for the rest of my life for a particular product. But yeah, so I think there's going to be some I would imagine there's going to be some dark ages as the channel matures, but I would hope that they would be short-lived.
Maxim, what's your thoughts on this?
Well, I think I feel the same way. It is the case. I mean, this has been happening as long as there's been any potential for capturing people's viewing habits, their interests, what engages them. As long as any potential for that has existed, we've been capturing it and using it either to guide the production of new things. If people say they like one particular car more than another, we make cars that are more like that. We're just getting more and more nuanced with it. My concern, I suppose, is, they say that when you do a Google search, there are at least 57 factors that influence the results that you get. And the concern I have is that it doesn't tell you that. You don't get a message on screen saying, by the way, we've excluded some results because we've decided that you aren't interested in them.
Yeah, but they put you in a group.
Right, you're in a group, but it's more than that. We're very vulnerable to control. And so, it is the case. It's a story I've often told is my mother's a ballet dancer, and every now and then, she lives overseas, and every now and then she'll ask me to buy something for her that relates to ballet. And it's fine, I'll buy it, and then I ship it to her personally. She just can't get it delivered overseas. But then for about a week or two, anytime I'm on a platform like Amazon, for example, or Facebook, I start seeing adverts for things that either relate to products specifically targeted at women or in particular to do with ballet. And this is a rather clunky example of tracking my activities. But the problem with this is not just that they're just showing me similar items for sale. They're pinning that to a kind of avatar that exists in virtual space that I have no control over. And that's the problem. Now, you were talking earlier about children and as an adult, I think there should be a degree of buyer beware. If you are using products and services, then you should know that your actions are being tracked, and that's going to influence the way things are sold to you. The problem comes with children who cannot be considered to be aware. And I seem to remember there was a legal case a little while ago of a company being sued for putting targeted ads on a children's TV channel that shouldn't be there. But this is no different from putting sweets and candies at the checkout of a supermarket. We're just trying to make money. And so as an artist, as a storyteller, I want to change the world and make things awesome. But people investing just want to know how much money they're going to make. And the more you can target advertising, the more you can influence your audience to convince them to pay money for premium products and services, the more they just are going to do that. Now, at the moment, our headsets, for example, are pretty blunt. You've got a center point of the headset that tracks what you've looked at. But we're moving towards, for example, the new Lytro VR headsets, where it's full peripheral vision, there's no focal point, and we can see exactly where your eyes are looking in the picture. And that's pretty creepy.
Not to take anything away from the actual data collection. I mean, the actual data collection, in my opinion, can change humanity in so many ways if it's being used for the right things. Like I said, I'm coming out of 3 years working for an electronic health record, and if we were aggregating every single piece of data from every single electronic health record in the world, and then we were putting together procedures and treatments and outcomes and finding the best that possibly happens for everything, and then just putting that out as this is how we treat this. This is because we have that data. We know this is the best way to treat this problem or this whatever it is. So I don't want to take anything away from the data collection either. It's kind of a hard subject.
So, but I am curious though, because like Maxim says, it's kind of creepy, and Alan is kind of like, actually the good applications for this. I'm kind of curious where this leads us in terms of privacy. Now, again, this is one of those topics that I've spoken to you about before, Maxim, but I'm going to throw this out there again and just talk about this idea that within the next maybe 1 or 2 generations, we're going to get to a stage where actually people are probably going to be a little bit less fussy when it comes to privacy. Right now, we're of that generation that still quite like to know that actually what we're doing is still private to us. But we also don't expect to be asked to share our information or give our information in necessarily the ways that the next generations will be quite happy to, because they will have an economy system where information and their data has value, and they understand that value exchange, and they will be quite happy to make that value exchange and to sacrifice their privacy in exchange for whether that's better service or access to goods or whatever the thing may be, but that they simply just won't mind as much as perhaps we in this generation care about our privacy. And I'm curious as to what that means in terms of the implications for things like immersive technologies. Talking about this in the context of, eye tracking and being able to understand what people are looking at or the habits that they have, particularly within an immersive environment. Do we feel that there is necessarily a privacy issue that we should be considering? Or do we think that perhaps this is one of those things that as we evolve into this technology within the next couple of generations, nobody's really going to care?
Well, as you say, we've spoken about this before. I think that we're going to lose 90%, most of our privacy, and we're not going to care because the benefits far outweigh the losses. I also think that there's potential for great social positive change. There was a TV series in the UK about embarrassing illnesses. And what was great about it, it was really just sensationalization of this sort of thing. But actually the way it was approached was very matter of fact. Here's a thing that here's some kind of disease that somebody has, or some disability or ailment that they are ashamed by, they're embarrassed by. And in the program, they would break it down, talk about the effect it's had on them, and talk about cures. And what was great about that was that it normalized, it regularized things that people otherwise would feel embarrassed to admit to. And I think the upside of losing our privacy is that we discover that we're all basically okay, and that there's no need to judge one another. And I think that opening up, that letting go of privacy could be incredibly beneficial. But there are 2 risks that I can say. Maybe there's more, but the 2 that spring to mind right now is, one, this danger that the better we are known, the more easily we can be marketed to and manipulated into wanting things that aren't particularly good for us. In the 1950s, you had doctors coming on TV saying how good cigarettes were for you. Yes. And that kind of misuse of information is very, very powerful. But the second type of misuse is, and it's actually regulated a lot less than one might imagine. The second issue is use of information where there's nothing intrinsically wrong with the information, but problems can come from it being shared. So example won't be, let's say, for example, I discover I have cancer and I've got 3 months to live, and I don't tell a soul. I don't tell my family. Let's say I've got children. Nobody in my social circles knows that I have cancer. I've decided to keep it a secret because that's my choice, and out of my own dignity, I'm going to keep it to myself. And then pamphlets start coming through the door, or adverts start popping up on my social media feeds for different kinds of cancer cures and doctors that provide services for cancer. That could reveal to people that I do not want to share this information with something. It fundamentally changes my situation. You get, for example, we live in a society which is very open to the LGBTQ community, people that are, I think it's about 38 definitions now, but whatever it is, people don't necessarily always feel that they orient well with the classic male, female, straight roles. That's fine in our society, and it's not that big a deal, although, of course, it is up to the individual to choose who they share that information with. But there are some countries in the world where you literally can be killed because that information gets out. So you might well have that information out in the open in Britain and think, so what? You go traveling, and it can be a real problem. So this misuse of information, I think, is something we need to be cautious about. But I also don't think we're going to be able to do much to stop it. I don't know, Alan, if you agree, but it is going to happen.
Okay, what's your thoughts on this, Alan?
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, it is going to happen to a point where, so the misuse of information, like we see it in every technology that we've had so far, is people misuse information, and they do it in a way, they do it purposely to get a particular response or to influence a certain behavior. I mean, more recently in the U.S., I mean, like we've seen it through social media. So it's one of those things where it's going to happen, and every new technology, the difference with, immersive technology, though, it goes back to you saying that you're actually creating memories. So it's not just something that I read on my Twitter feed. Now it's something that I've experienced and that is a part of me. And if somebody wants to misuse that technology, they've gone to the core of who I am. And so, yeah, it can be scary.
Very much so.
So here's the thing, gentlemen. As always, I like to ask a bit of a big question. And I'm going to throw this one out in terms of what is it that we think needs to change? Be that technological or cultural when it comes to maintaining or protecting the ethics and the morals within the context of immersive technology. How do we protect the user? And I'm going to throw this one at you, Maxim, first, because you've had more practice on the show.
Oh, goodness. That's like, how do we explain relativity and levitate?
Go.
Okay. Thank you. Let me put it this way. If there were one change that I would wish to witness in the world today, it would be a reduction of judgment across the board. And by that, I don't mean discernment, but judgment. And unfortunately, it is a part of our popular culture that judgment is a good thing. It's encouraged, it's nurtured, it's developed. Because if we judge, then we feel judged. And if we feel judged, we try to look for solutions. I'm wearing the wrong clothes, I'm wearing the wrong shoes, or my haircut's wrong, my skin's no good. I want to be accepted, but I know that I judge other people, so they must judge me. And so you're constantly chasing to feel accepted and critically to accept yourself. So I think that there's a potential, I think there's a scope for these kinds of technologies and the reduction in privacy and the sharing of information to remind people that we're all in this together, that we're all human, we're all flawed, we're all making mistakes, nobody knows what they're doing, and to encourage a new perspective on ourselves and the rest of the world that is more accepting, not just of the diversity, which is a beautiful thing in my view, or the variation culturally and even genetically in the world. All that's beautiful in my view, but also in the decisions and choices that people make. If you choose to wear one kind of clothes rather than another, this should be something that we just celebrate rather than having opinions about it. And so to bring this back in line with the line of your questioning, I think that there's an opportunity for these technologies, and especially the VR ones, where you have the opportunity to experience another person's life in such a deeper way For example, I've heard of very interesting examples of VR experiences where your vision is deliberately deteriorated by the VR headset so that you experience what it's like to be partially sighted. How's that for helping people to understand the importance of some of the environmental changes we can make to make things accessible for people with blindness? That has enormous potential. So I would say that it's a very broad brushstroke, but I would say that if we can encourage those people setting the standards and creating the media to focus on a kind of universal acceptance and mutual identification, we will begin to see a kind of sea change of the impact of this technology. But the flip side of that is if this technology is just used as another way to make us nervous, to make us angry, to make us fearful, to convince us to like things that we didn't like otherwise. Again, it's like fire. You can cook with it or you can burn people with it. And I think it's what needs to be in the DNA of the attitudes of the creators that's going to have the biggest impact.
Okay, Alan, how do you follow that?
I'm going to follow up because I think the last few sentences kind of flows directly into what I was going to say. And I think there has to be a level of corporate responsibility, if that exists anymore. But I think if you have a certain level of corporate responsibility, you have this data coming in, and we've already pointed out in this podcast and, how much good the amount of data can be. And I think if the companies and producers, whether it be, I'm not going to lie, I'm speaking more to marketers and people who are marketing within these channels, to know that let's not misuse the data. Let's do what we can. Yes, we're marketers. We want to market to people, and we want to use that data to the best of our ability, but let's not go overboard with it. Let's not try to influence behaviors. Let's not try and change the person, in a way that suits them. Let's not put them in a box. Let's not do the, hey, I'm only going to show you five things on your channel because we've decided that this is what you like. Because that's not what I like, So let's be more responsible with the way we use data, and let's be more open to letting people be individuals and not part of a group.
Okay, so showing a little bit of restraint, perhaps.
Restraint would be, yes.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, as always, we like to ask you to share with us your social media handle of choice so that our lovely listeners can find out a little bit more about what you're up to. So what would that be, Maxim?
Pretty easy, Maxim Jago on Twitter. So at Maxim Jago, you'll find me.
Wonderful. And Alan?
You can find me at badass_marketer on Twitter.
Thank you.
Oh, my Twitter handle sucks. I need a better Twitter. That's great.
I've been told, Maxim.
Well, thank you for joining us and thank you for listening. If you enjoy this content, don't forget to subscribe and review, and follow us on Twitter at Digital Jam Ltd. Thinking of starting your own podcast? Why not speak to the GL Pro UK team? They handle all of our podcasting service needs. Tell them that Digital Jam Session sent you and you'll get 10% off your first order. Find out more at www.glpro.co.uk. DigitalJamSessions.com